He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
Just a quick warning, this podcast contains descriptions of violence some listeners might find confronting.
I did not know which way to go or who to turn to.
In those tense hours after Darcy's attack, with the kitchen block swept up in rumour and hushed conversations, Ernie felt all alone.
I was very scared.
The only person he trusted was his cellmate, Aaron.
Aaron and I had discussed the day's events.
Now, don't panic. I'm not trying to introduce a new theory on what happened the day that Darcy was murdered at Mount Eden Prison. But Aaron's recollections are interesting, and I think important, because he didn't give evidence about his discussions with Ernie at Ross's trials. In fact, he didn't testify at all. And, you guessed it, the defence hadn't been told about his police statement, and the Crown, well, they decided not to call him as a witness. Ross actually didn't get Aaron's first police statement until March 1988, 3 years after the murder. It was part of the evidence the Ombudsman made the police release, which you'll remember from the previous episode, went off like the 4th of July.
2 witnesses made statements to the police which contradicted their evidence in court.
Then just days before Ross's new appeal hearing in early November 1990, his lawyers were hit with a revelation. Aaron had actually given a second police statement as well. In it, he said Ernie, the Crown star witness to Darcy's murder, had told him
he didn't actually see the person hitting him.
Oh boy. You're listening to Nark, an RNZ investigative podcast. I'm your host, Mike Wesley-Smith. This is episode 12, Quashed.
I've been in Mount Eden since 10th of November 1984.
This is from Aaron's first statement to police made on the 7th of January 1985, the day after Darcy's murder.
I don't know what happened to Darcy. If I knew, I would say something.
But it was his second statement to police on the 11th of January 1985 that changed the direction of Ross's appeal. Aaron was just 25 when he was sent to Mount Eden to serve a 6-month sentence for theft. He died some years ago. An actor is reading his words.
On the 3rd of January 1985, I was transferred to the kitchen as a dishwasher cleaner. My cellmate Ernie started in the kitchen on the same day.
The evidence suggests there is much less reason to challenge Aaron's credibility compared to Gordon, Ernie, and even Ross. Because as far as I know, Aaron never received any money from police nor early release. He was removed from Mount Eden Prison for his protection, but he was sent to another jail, not to a motel like Ernie. Yes, Aaron was doing time for dishonesty offending, but compared with the records of the other crims in the kitchen block, Aaron seems almost a model citizen. Definitely a more reliable witness in my book.
I felt very much the new boy in the kitchen. I still don't know the names of all the people in the kitchen. We just talk and generally do our work.
On the day of the murder, Aaron said he and Ernie both got up and started doing the dishes in the kitchen at the same time, around 5:30 in the morning. When they finished at 7, Ernie went to the lunchroom while Aaron walked back to his cell to lie down. On his way there, Aaron said he met Darcy, who'd been led into the kitchen block by prison guard James. According to Aaron, Darcy was smoking a joint.
He held out the cigarette to me and said, "Here." I said, "Sorry, I don't smoke, thank you." He said nothing and kept on walking.
Aaron then says he returned to his cell. He popped back to the kitchen to tell Ernie to call him when more dishes arrived, then wandered back to his cell again. A short time later, he says around 7:20, Ernie arrived at the entrance to their cell. Now in Aaron's first statement, he recalled,
Ernie came in and told me a man had fainted in the small dining area of the kitchen.
In his second statement 4 days later, he described that conversation this way.
Ernie came into my cell and said that there was a guy on the floor in the smoko room.
You'll remember Bob Hesketh, Ross's lawyer, thought it was significant Ernie hadn't mentioned to Aaron he'd seen Darcy viciously attacked. Aaron told the police after speaking to Ernie he returned to the kitchen to see what was going on, only to see Darcy being wheeled out on a stretcher by the ambulance crew. Apart from Ernie staying mum about seeing the attack, there's nothing that jumps off the page so far. But it's what Aaron says happened over the next few days that's really revealing. All this came from his second statement, the one released to Ross's lawyers just before his appeal. The first important point is that Aaron confirmed Ernie's account that Ross had approached them both 2 days after the killing to say all the other inmates had agreed not to talk to detectives.
He asked us, "What are you going to do?" And we replied, "We'll say the same thing." I got the feeling that we were going to be, or were being threatened by what he'd just said.
To me, this is significant. Here's Aaron describing Ross acting in a pretty suspicious manner, like he had something to hide. That would have been helpful for the Crown case. But then Aaron described a pretty disturbing encounter he had with one of the Crown's other main witnesses, Gordon. This, Aaron said, took place in the kitchen 3 days after Darcy's death.
As I was leaving, Gordon said, "This is how you cut bodies." And at the same time he was slashing meat. He told me, after a post-mortem, this is how you take all the guts out and put it in a bag and shove it in the stomach. Then he went into detail and said they use a syringe and take all the blood out, use wax, do up their face because people only see their face anyway, and this is how it will be done to you. That was enough for me, and I just took off. I felt that he was doing it to me to frighten me, in case I knew something, to keep my mouth shut.
If you thought Ross was acting suspiciously, then Gordon's behaviour is outright alarming. Was this why the Crown hadn't called Aaron? Because he would undermine Gordon's credibility? But for Ross, the most important part of Aaron's second statement is where he contradicted Ernie's account.
Ernie told me he knows 5 people who are involved. He didn't actually see the person hitting him, but knows he was hit 3 times in the head with the paddle.
So Ernie, the star eyewitness, told his trusted cellmate that he didn't see Ross hitting Darcy. Aaron's exact words, he didn't actually see the person hitting him.
He also told me that he got the chip of wood that came off the paddle.
That's right. Ernie told Aaron he'd kept the piece that broke off the murder paddle during the frenzied attack. The same piece police never found. This was a completely different story to the one Ernie told police and testified to at Ross's first trial. Here's what Ernie said to the jury.
I gave the bit of wood a boot and it went up underneath the blue door where there's a cupboard.
He said another inmate then,
Picked it up and put it in the rubbish bin.
I can't see why Aaron would lie about what Ernie told him. But then what reason would Ernie have to give Aaron and police 2 different stories? Why would he say he kept the pedal piece, a really crucial bit of evidence, but then tell police it went in the bin? Honestly, I don't know. But this was all evidence the jury in Ross's first trial should have heard. At the very least, it should have been provided to Ross's lawyers. That was also the conclusion reached by the Crown's top lawyer, Solicitor General John McGrath. McGrath was due to appear for the Crown in opposition to Ross's appeal in November 1990. During his preparation, McGrath came across Aaron's second statement and realised, perhaps with a sinking feeling, it hadn't been disclosed to the defence at the first trial. It was the latest in a long list of crucial evidence you've heard that was withheld from Ross and his lawyers. There were Gordon and Ernie's first police interviews, Ernie's second anonymous note, and now Aaron's 2 statements. So, less than 48 hours before the appeal hearing, McGrath provided Aaron's second statement to Ross's lawyers, Bob Hesketh and Simon Lockhart.
At the Court of Appeal, Solicitor General John McGrath appeared conciliatory, admitting there is evidence which hadn't been properly disclosed.
For the Crown, the game was up. Their opposition to Ross's appeal had collapsed. It was the day Ross had dreamed of.
5 years of fighting to prove his innocence finally brought rewards for Ross Appelgren yesterday. The Court of Appeal quashed the murder conviction and ordered a new trial.
While Ross and his supporters were full of relief and the media were focused squarely on his dramatic story, the news of a new trial came as a gut punch for Darcy Tahira's widow, Suzanne Young.
Did that catch you by surprise?
Yeah, well, see, it was
hot in the media.
Yeah.
Again, it was all about Ross.
Yeah.
And this, this Ross Appelgren, he's da-da-da-da-da, and he's, getting a new trial, and this has happened, and, the police haven't been, well, obviously doing their job properly, and all this. It was all in the media.
In the years since Darcy's murder, Suzanne had remarried and started a family. She thought that sad chapter of her life had been closed, but now it had been ripped open again.
What was your understanding at the time as to why the conviction had been quashed?
Well, that was my question. Why is he getting another trial?
And what were you told?
Well, I wasn't really told a hell of a lot.
On the 23rd of November 1990, Suzanne had to stand by as Ross walked out of jail a free man. On the day of his release, journalist Robert Mannion was at the prison with Bob Hesketh, Simon Lockhart, and Ross's longtime supporter, Rosemary Wilson.
And we were inside Mount Eden, and I thought, shit, I don't know if the guards would love the fact there's a journalist in here, but anyway. And so I think we were with Ross when he was waiting to get out, and it was a real insight into just how you don't want to go to prison. The sort of desire, the freedom was just minutes away, he's sort of brimming with that.
While Bob, Simon and Robert went into Mount Eden to get Ross, Rosemary stayed in the car park. She'd done as much as anyone else to bring this occasion about. Here's how she described that special moment in the memoir she co-authored with Ross.
I stand alone in the car park beside the prison. The sunshine is brilliant, and a breeze plays with the weeds and the broken asphalt. I watch as the afternoon visitors walk to their cars, leaving the people they love behind those grey walls where the sunshine is excluded. I feel a potent mix of emotions, with gratitude and joy at the top of the list, and pity for those who are less fortunate than we are. I feel absolutely dazed to realise how much we have achieved against the odds. For so many years I have preached about the need to stay positive. I have promised and prodded, trusted and hoped. Only now can I afford to admit how terrified and hopeless I have been at times, how often I have asked myself how I dared to do what I did.
Ross packed up his things, leaving his TV to a mate, and carried the rest of his belongings out in a Bluebird potato chips box. As he did so, he said an inmate walked up to him and said, "Good on you, mate. You deserve it."
There's not much to show for 6 years. Now I just want to find a bit of peace and quiet. Just try and get prison out of my system.
This is what Ross said to Robert as they left the cells that day. They're Ross's words, and we've used AI to put his real voice to them.
My faith in the system is a bit mixed. It wasn't the law that helped me. It was the people behind me. With everything I've had going in legal arguments, I still put it down to the fact that it's not what you know, it's who you know, and if you've got the right backing.
What was your reaction either then or now to knowing that, the role you had at least played some part in overturning Ross's conviction?
Oh, look, I'm sure I would have been again quite, satisfied with it, happy about that, because the whole point of doing a series of stories like that is you're holding something up to the light, you're hoping that there'll be a response to it. So I thought, well, good, I've always thought he should get another trial, and now he's going to get one.
When Ross finally emerged from Mount Eden alongside his lawyers and Robert, Rosemary was there waiting.
A small procession comes into sight. Bob, Simon and Robert are escorting Ross across the car park. A smile you could light a candle from stretches his face.
In their memoir, Rosemary describes Ross's first evening out and the knees up they had.
Ross is relaxing and having fun. We sit telling idiotic jokes and laughing at our own inanities. We blame the champagne, but know that 2 small glasses don't account for our merriment. I know that Ross is warmed by this spontaneous welcome to the world outside. I also know that tears are not far below the surface. Our conversation is punctuated by Ross's, "Hey, look at that! The sky, with golden grey piles of cloud above low shafts of sunshine, is beautiful. And the fields are gold with dandelion and buttercup."
The media clamoured to speak with Ross, including Radio Pacific's Pam Corkery. For this interview in November 1990, unlike the last, Ross was able to go on air without worrying the cops were hunting him down.
It's 20 minutes past 9, Radio Pacific. The talkback number's 3930999. Well, Ross Appelgren was free at the weekend, bailed on Friday, 5 and a bit years after a murder conviction, which has now been quashed by the Court of Appeal, and it will go towards a retrial. Ross, hello.
Hello, Pam.
Good weekend.
Oh, beautiful, yes.
Now, after a long time inside, what do you do? I mean, I don't want to get into the private, intimate bits of it, but how do you feel when you walk out?
Great, yeah. I've just been trying to cram everything in, going fishing, going for walks, and on the beach. And
do you feel like you've got the emotional tools to get back into life?
oh, yeah. It's always an adjusting period, but I've got all the right people helping too.
The day of Ross's release was also memorable for Julie Whittaker, one of the jurors that had put Ross behind bars, but had since become convinced of his innocence and had started visiting him in prison.
I think I remember exactly where I was, because I was working as a photographer then, and I was sitting on a particular street in Milford taking photos, and I heard it over the radio. Yeah, very happy for him.
Was it quite an emotional reaction you had, or kind of just a...
Yeah, but we weren't together then.
They weren't together then, but it wasn't long before their unlikely friendship turned into something more.
He then comes to live with you whilst he's on bail. And is that when things really kind of begin to blossom?
Yeah.
Not knowing what the future would bring, Ross didn't mess around. He popped the big question in April 1991, just 5 months after his release.
How did the engagement happen? What? Who proposed to who? How did that all...
Well, Ross had his 40th birthday at my place, our place. He'd already asked me to marry him before that, but that was at his birthday. That's when he announced it to everybody that was there.
Oh, right.
Like family, and mainly his family. And there was a few gasps.
Any pause on your part, or you're just straight yes?
Oh, yeah, we'd gotten to know each other so incredibly well. There was no hesitation.
I cut all ties with past criminal associates. Julie has shown me how to budget, pay bills, and general home life, which had been alien to me in the past. I would never let her down, nor myself for that matter.
Ross Appelgren at prayer with his fiancée, Julie Whittaker. They have much to pray for.
This is audio of a 1992 TV3 story Ross and Julie featured in. They're sitting in the church, surrounded by other parishioners. Ross is dressed smartly in a collared shirt with a tie. The only hint of his past sins are the prison tattoos visible on his hands, grasping his prayer book. Jeff Howarth was the priest's assistant at the Anglican Church.
St Michael and All Angels, the Anglican Church in Bayswater, which, by the way, is now a potter's studio.
Jeff's one of those incredibly organised people who not only keeps a daily diary, he holds on to all his old ones.
Yeah, I've just been consulting my diary for 1991, and my first references to Ross and Julie are there. I think September 1991.
Would they go on to become regular parishioners at the church?
Yes, they did. Yeah, the congregation enjoyed them and got thoroughly used to seeing them there.
Was there any disquiet amongst the congregation?
If there was such a reaction, I never picked it up, and no one ever commented to me, why is this person with us? I never got that reaction.
Was it surprising that you had no one raise a...
Yes, I was surprised, and I was actually rather pleased too.
What were your impressions of Ross? Or how would you describe him?
He was like someone I had never met before.
As Ross acknowledged in his memoir, he was hardly a stereotypical churchgoer.
I would like to make clear that I'm not and have never claimed to be a born-again Christian. I have, however, found through the church and the people involved, friendship, openness, and peace within myself. Jeff and his family have become very close to Julie and me.
I actually rather like Ross. I found him pretty honest, pretty straight up. To me, he was very keen to leave his past behind him and start a new life. And I think he was genuinely attached to Julie, just as she was genuinely attached to him.
Ross and Julie did what they could to make their life as normal as possible. Long walks, picnics, going out for dinner. Moments of respite from the reality that Ross wasn't entirely free. He was just on bail.
Because of ongoing court appearances, I could only obtain casual work, painting and decorating, drain laying, and anything I could put my hand to. Although for that 18 months I was not in jail, I did live a restricted life. I reported to the police on a regular basis. I had to live where directed, and of course, my life was not my own.
Another distraction was the news media, thirsty for the remarkable yarn about the juror who fell for the man she convicted.
Yeah, well, it was quite a story, wasn't it?
Yeah, so you could understand the interest?
Oh, I could understand it, yeah.
Ross and Julie appeared in several women's magazines with headlines that wrote themselves. She'll stand by her man, trial of love, and perhaps my favourite, jailbird turned lovebird.
Did it get a bit worrisome at times?
Actually, no. No. But that's just what I did back then.
Yeah.
And we both did it.
Because it helped keep the case alive in the public consciousness.
Yes, it did. There was a lot of interest.
One of those who became interested was TV3 journalist Keith Davies. He did several interviews with Julie and Ross in the early 1990s.
Was there an instant attraction?
It was very easy to talk to each other.
Yeah, just a good feeling about each other, I believe. Friendship like that was something I hadn't experienced before.
We've heard quite a bit from Keith in the interviews he did already in this podcast. His reporting was a useful starting point for my own investigation. Keith now lives north of Auckland, and we've spoken quite a few times about Ross, his conviction, and claims of innocence.
It took me a while, but I now believe him to be innocent, and I have no doubt and no question in my mind about that. Initially, of course, I was just looking at him as just another crim denying, as they all did.
But as he came to spend more and more time on the story, he started to see another side of Ross. In particular, the close bond he'd formed with Julie.
Yeah, he was a criminal. He spent a big chunk of his life in jail, but he wasn't an evil bugger. He was actually quite a nice person. I started to wonder if, in fact, he was the killer. It took me a while to question seriously whether he was the killer, but I did start to wonder quite early on in the piece, is he this man? As more and more information came across my desk and as I started talking to more and more people, it became clear that there was something really untoward going on here.
Keith uncovered a lot of significant evidence and leads. That included the details surrounding the rather awkward and ongoing relationship police had with their erstwhile star witness, Ernie. The last we'd heard of Ernie, he'd taken his 30k from New Zealand police and restarted his life across the ditch in Australia. How this all came about is hugely contentious and would create a diplomatic incident when it eventually came out, years later.
Row is brewing over claims that New Zealand police smuggled a convicted criminal into Australia after he'd been denied legal entry.
And I promise, we will get to that. But by 1990, Ernie's new life in Aussie was good, but not great. He had a new girlfriend who he planned to marry, and both had just returned from an around-the-world trip. Apparently unaware Ross had been released, Ernie sent a taped recording to Police National Headquarters voicing new demands. Ernie told the top police brass in no uncertain terms he felt he'd never been properly compensated for helping put Ross behind bars.
He wanted, wait for it, $555,000 with no taxes, unconditional. The demand was backed up with a threat. Failure to get a review of the whole situation, and I chain myself to your police front doors and seek protection for the rest of my life. I ask you to consider this with the least public attention so that I may go about my life as it was so intended.
The convicted swindler clearly had not lost any of his chutzpah. Not only did he want $500,000, he also wanted the police to help his girlfriend to become a New Zealand citizen.
Now I know some of these things can be done at high levels of government.
Then, and I found this really interesting, he revealed to New Zealand police that he'd been living illegally in Australia.
I'm basically unemployable because of any risk in the future being found out on my criminal record.
Now you might think this should have prompted New Zealand police to alert Australian immigration authorities. Well, that ain't what happened. Instead, Ernie's letter landed on the desk of Detective Senior Sergeant Mike Moneyman, who'd worked on Ernie's witness protection program. You remember the one with the cool name? Operation Icing. Moneyman was prompted to write to Peter Jenkinson, who was in charge of the Tahira murder investigation. This is one of those scoops that Keith Davies uncovered. And here he is, reading from Moneyman's letter.
The only thing that Ernie is to be made aware of is that his fingerprints will never change. And as long as he stays out of trouble, he will be difficult to find in any case. But if he puts one foot wrong or is picked up for any offence where he will be fingerprinted, his true identity will be immediately disclosed.
Several days later, Ernie sent police another communication. However, what he said has never been disclosed, either to Ross's lawyers or anyone else. To this day, it remains a mystery. We know about it because Moneyman referred to it in a second letter he sent to Peter Jenkinson, which also contained a remarkable suggestion.
Having read a letter from Ernie, Moneyman wrote to his superior officer, I can see his need to have Appelgren back in prison again, but one wonders whether or not the best option may be to fail to pursue a retrial.
It was a huge call for Moneyman to throw into the mix, drop the case against Ross and walk away. I can understand Ross's legal team wanting to know what moved Moneyman to say that. Unfortunately, Moneyman and Jenkinson have both since passed away, and of course, the police have lost their entire file for the Darcy Tahira homicide. What we do know is there is no way Peter Jenkinson was going to let Ross slip away. He convicted him once, and he was determined to do it again. There was just one problem. When Ernie finally found out in early 1991 that Ross's conviction had been quashed, he was pissed. Really pissed at
the police bungling of the case.
As his next letter to police made clear.
No one person has any idea the fear I am having, have had, and will always have in relation to retaliation from the accused.
Ernie wanted it known police should not automatically presume he was happy to come back and testify a second time against Ross. He had yet more needs to be met first. This included assurance of police protection in New Zealand, money to cover his costs while away from home, and
during my time in Auckland, I'd be placed close to a beach area so to exercise and relax and not to be hemmed in a hotel room shut off from clean air and exercise. It is high time the police showed good and proper intentions well in advance to myself of their sincerity in cleaning this matter once and for all.
With Ernie's cooperation hanging by a thread, Jenkinson flew to Australia in February 1991 to convince Ernie to testify. Jenkinson's notes of his discussion were only revealed years later by the Sunday Star-Times newspaper. According to Jenkinson, Ernie was upset at the treatment he'd received from police.
Ernie had stated that he was in the country illegally, and on 2 occasions, problems had arisen over work.
When Ernie threatened to go to the media, Jenkinson's response was,
I told him that the police had honoured their agreement. I told him that the question of his status could be looked at if the department wanted to play dirty.
Let's just pause here for a minute, because that sounds pretty full on. I don't have a copy of Jenkinson's job sheet. Remember, police have lost their file for this case. So I'm going by what's reported in the Sunday Star Times. But it wasn't disputed by police then, so let's assume it's accurate. What Jenkinson said to Ernie, to me, sounded like a threat. He's basically telling Ernie that unless you play ball, we're going to tell the Aussie authorities you're in their country illegally. By this point, Ernie had started a new life and business in Australia with a long-term girlfriend. Now, Jenkinson's warning him the New Zealand police could get dirty and send that all up in smoke. I'm probably stating the obvious here, but this wasn't just a threat. It also looks like a pretty strong inducement for Ernie to again give evidence for the police. So against that backdrop, it's perhaps not surprising that Ernie softened his stance and agreed to cooperate. But almost immediately, his patience was tested when Ross's retrial, first scheduled for April 1991, was adjourned until November that year. Ernie flew back to Auckland to testify, only for the hearing to be postponed once more, this time till May 1992. Ernie complained to police that he'd been fired for leaving his job to fly over and had to start up a business as a courier driver. He then hit the roof when police said they would pay him $600 a week to come to the trial when it eventually took place.
What the hell do you people think this is? $600 will not last 2 days. By the time I pay someone to drive my van and wages, there's nothing for me to cover my expenses, so think again. I told you many times you cannot expect me to drop everything for your little whims and expect me to jump when you see fit. So do some proper thinking and get back to me.
So, Ernie wasn't coming quietly. Without him, the prosecution case against Ross would be in tatters.
Of course, there is going to be a retrial, but, it's been so discredited, the case against you. Are you worried?
I'm not worried at all. In fact, I'd welcome it.
This is Ross speaking to Pam Corkery on Radio Pacific in that interview which aired shortly after his release.
Quite honestly, I don't think it's going to come to that.
What, you don't think it'll come to a retrial?
No, I don't think it will. Even if it does come to the retrial, well, then all the cards will be on the table and I know who's going to be embarrassed and it's not going to be me.
You're not especially bitter, though.
No, I'm not bitter. I always had some sort of faith in the system, although it was shaken a few times, but I think there's still a lot of answers to be answered, questions to be answered, and I think they're long overdue, most of them.
Ross spent 14 months on bail, enjoying his new life on the outside with Julie. When the retrial finally came a knockin', both felt the outcome would be different. So confident that Julie and Ross had sent out invites for their wedding, which they'd booked for after the trial in July 1992.
And what was that based on? Just the evidence that had emerged?
Everything that had emerged, obviously it wasn't everything at all. I realise now. Very confident.
His lawyer Simon Lockhart was more nervous. Simon asked Ross if he considered pleading guilty to a lesser charge of manslaughter.
And what was Ross's reaction?
I said no. He said, I'm not pleading guilty to what I haven't done.
I said no, and he said, why not? And I said, because I'm bloody innocent. And I'm not going to plead guilty to manslaughter or anything I haven't done. He said, think about it, man. But I said, no way.
With their client's instructions made loud and clear, Simon Lockhart and Bob Hesketh ploughed ahead. They sorted through the list of inmates in the kitchen block when Darcy was killed to see if any had helpful evidence. Ernie and Gordon were locked in as the Crown's star witnesses. Ross again would testify on his own behalf, and had hoped to call Ernie's cellmate Aaron to tell the jury what Ernie had told him, that he hadn't seen the murder. But Aaron never got the call up. Given the importance of his evidence, both for and against Ross, this absolutely baffled me. I came across an April 1991 letter from the Crown to Ross's lawyers, which indicated that prosecutors considered having Aaron give evidence, but at some point, they changed their minds. Ross's lawyers didn't call Aaron to testify either. and I can only assume he got left off the witness list because his evidence could hurt both sides. But I have to say, if I was on the jury, I'd have wanted to hear what Aaron had to say. There was, however, one ex-inmate Ross thought he could rely on. Martin, who gave evidence for him at the first trial. Martin's the former inmate who testified that Ernie fantasised about killing his partner and was desperate to leave Mount Eden. When Darcy was killed, Martin was serving a 2-year sentence, and like Ross, he was a prolific burglar with a long criminal history. After Martin was released, he stayed mates with Ross and eventually got introduced to Julie.
Yeah, not a close friend, but an acquaintance, and I know we'd visited them.
Martin even got sent an invite to their wedding. In January 1991, Bob Hesketh received a note saying Martin wanted to testify for the defence at the retrial.
Martin met with both my lawyers, Mr. Simon Lockhart QC and Mr. Robert Hesketh, in their chambers. They discussed his evidence and he confirmed he would be giving evidence on my behalf at the second trial. Martin confirmed he had not witnessed anything, but he'd seen me down in the cell block area about the time.
If true, it was corroboration of the central part of Ross's alibi, that he was away from the kitchen and lunchroom when Darcy was bashed. If you're thinking this was a pretty important detail that Martin oddly failed to mention in his evidence at the first trial, well, so am I. We'll come back to this very question soon. Ross's lawyers received even more good news when they found another former inmate who we'll call Felix. Felix didn't feature in the first trial, but he told Ross's legal team he'd been in the kitchen block around 7 on the morning of the murder. He gave the following account at Ross's retrial.
I came back into the kitchen area, stood around for a moment or two, I think, from memory. I spoke to Ross Appelgren. I then went down to the toilet block, which is situated was situated at the end of the cell block on the left-hand side as you would approach it from the kitchen. Went to the toilet. I then came back to my particular cell intending to get a book, but prior to this, anyway, Ross was coming down that particular area himself on the way to the toilet.
First Martin, and now Felix. Ross's "I was in the toilet" defence was looking much more solid than it had in the first trial. Of course, that was until...
Approximately 4 weeks before the second trial, Martin went to Australia and got involved in this drug thing.
That drug thing? Well, the story behind it is so bonkers it could have been dreamed up by someone high on their own supply. So here's how it all went down. In April 1992, Martin flew to Sydney, Australia. He said he was going to visit a dying friend. But there was another benefit to Martin being Gonski. New Zealand police had warrants out for his arrest. He told Ross before leaving he thought the police were watching him. Less than 24 hours after arriving in Sydney, Martin was busted by Aussie cops.
He was arrested in King's Cross on drug offences.
TV3 journalist Keith Davies reported on the huge mess Martin landed himself in.
Initially, the Sydney police reported Martin had been picked up for possession of a small amount of heroin and some cannabis. That was the first and last time anyone mentioned the serious matter of heroin.
Despite Martin admitting to buying the heroin, he wasn't pinged for it. Instead, he was charged with possession and importation of cannabis.
But almost immediately was asking those Sydney detectives if there was a way he could speak to their homicide squad. Means to say they asked why, and he explained his involvement that something had happened in New Zealand about 5 years ago.
Then came Martin's jaw dropper.
When in jail, he saw a bloke kill this other bloke, and he gave evidence that cleared the killer. The story he now told was that he was sitting at a table in the prison lunchroom. Tahira, the guy who got killed, no more than 2 meters away. There was no mention of anyone else in the room, and he could see no one else in the kitchen.
Martin told Aussie detectives
Ross walked up behind Darcy and brought the paddle straight over Darcy's head. Ross swung the paddle with both hands over his head.
Now, this was at odds with just about all the evidence that was given at the first trial regarding other people and people in the kitchen and what have you. There was certainly no mention of Ernie, who was supposedly watching intently as Appelgren battered Tahira to death in the otherwise empty lunchroom. No explanation as to why the only non-criminal to give evidence at the earlier trial, the prison officer Stedman, didn't notice Martin being there at all.
A surprised Aussie copper asked the obvious question. Why are you only bringing this up now?
I just want to get out of here. I've had enough. I want to go back and tell the truth and start a new life. I'm willing to pay my own way back. Just put me on a plane in Sydney and they can meet me at Auckland.
In short, he was offering to turn himself into a prosecution witness, and Julie did.
New Zealand police were quickly alerted to Martin's arrest. They told the Aussies he wasn't to be offered any deals for information about the homicide. Martin was processed and appeared in a Sydney court on the 2nd of May 1992. The cannabis importation charge was withdrawn, apparently due to lack of evidence, and Martin pleaded guilty just to possession. The Sydney prosecutor then told the court,
if Your Worship feels it appropriate to deal with Martin by way of a monetary fine, tentative arrangements have been made with Air New Zealand for Martin to depart on Flight 106 today. New Zealand authorities, Your Worship, will meet with him on his arrival at Auckland Airport.
His Worship was only too happy to oblige. Martin was fined $645 Australian dollars.
But no mention at all of the heroin.
And with that, Martin boarded Air New Zealand Flight 106 for his return home. Waiting for Martin at Auckland International Airport was Detective Sergeant Anthony Murphy. But instead of a welcome home sign, Detective Murphy greeted Martin with his outstanding arrest warrants. Murphy's record of their conversation suggests Martin wasn't very happy at the reception he received.
I told them in Australia that I did not want to go into custody, and if I did, then what I told them I would say I fabricated so that I could return to New Zealand.
Murphy was curious to know if what Martin told the Aussie cops was a lie.
It is if you're going to keep me in custody.
Then he changed his mind. No, it wasn't lies.
I just want to clear it up. Look, Ross didn't mean to kill him. He just wanted to put him in hospital. I just thought he was going to punch him.
He just didn't say anything at the first trial because
I was in jail. I was sort of part of the crew, I suppose, and, I didn't bother me in any great way then at the time.
Martin then revealed he and Ross had discussed what he'd say for Ross in the witness box.
My evidence was going to be that I could place Ross away from the murder scene. It was as simple as that. If I spoke to him down by the toilets or I saw him coming from the toilets.
Martin told Murphy the real truth was what he'd told the Aussies. He saw Ross murder Darcy.
And you're going to ask me, can we believe anything he says? I don't know if he knows what the truth is anymore, to be honest with you.
But for Ross, the main impact of Martin's about turn was not the loss of him as a defence witness, it was the loss of his lead lawyer, Simon Lockhart.
Mr. Lockhart, who was to defend me at my second trial, had to resign from my case approximately 2 weeks prior to my trial. He did so because he was going to appear as a defence witness. This came about because of Martin's crossing over to the prosecution. Mr. Lockhart was to give evidence of conversations which took place in his chambers between Martin and himself.
The conversations where Martin placed Ross away from the scene of the crime. There's a long-standing rule that a lawyer cannot represent someone in a case in which they also have to appear as a witness. So Simon Lockhart was out. Ross's remaining lawyer, Bob Hesketh, thought he couldn't do the case alone. So on the eve of retrial, Ross scrambled to find a new barrister to help out. Up to the plate stepped Peter Williams, QC.
How many murder cases have you worked on, Peter Williams?
Look, I don't know. Quite a lot.
100?
Or well over 100, maybe closer to 200.
That's Williams in an RNZ interview with Wallace Chapman a year before his death in 2015. For decades, Williams was one of New Zealand's leading trial lawyers, representing a who's who of defendants, from Arthur Allen Thomas to Ron Jorgensen, one of the Bassett Road murderers.
I usually spend on a big case like that a lot of time with a client. I like to be saturated in all the detail.
But he had almost no time to saturate himself in the detail of Ross's case. He had just 2 weeks.
Williams was a very, very capable and respected lawyer, but that was asking a heck of a lot of anybody.
Williams did, though, have plenty of experience working on cases in which the police and Crown failed to disclose key evidence. The very reason Ross had won a retrial in the first place.
I've heard of cases where the police have actually laughed after a case. If only they'd known what we had on our files, this chap would have got off. But of course, the dumb idiots, they didn't get onto it. You know what I mean? That sort of attitude.
This is Williams speaking to Keith Davies in 1991 for a TV3 story on secret witnesses like Ernie. Williams described for Keith the challenges lawyers face when police don't reveal the benefits secret witnesses receive for giving their evidence.
Even an experienced lawyer could cross-examine such a witness for several days and still not reveal all the arrangements that have gone on behind the scenes, which may be arrangements with police officers that are not witnesses in the case. The inducements may not be given.
That was why, when Williams joined Ross's defence, he wanted to ensure the Crown didn't hold any evidence back. Evidence the jury in the first trial didn't hear.
The jury will not pick it up unless they have the information. Even if you're a computer, you can't get the right answer unless the information is fed into the computer. So, they're not magicians. They can only work on the information that is provided. And if they don't know about the inducements and things like that in relation to a secret witness, how can they make a judgment on it?
Months earlier, in July 1991, Ross's lawyers had inspected the police file and requested copies of the documents they wanted. With that done, Bruce Squire QC, the lead prosecutor for the retrial, wrote to Bob Hesketh.
You have had access to many documents, which in my judgment you were not legally entitled to, simply because I was anxious to ensure that your client had no cause for complaint over the issue of discovery, given the background to the order for the retrial made by the Court of Appeal.
So now the defence had absolutely everything, right? Shortly before Ross's case returned to court, Keith Davies interviewed him and Julie.
What do you want to hear? Like I've always said, I just wanted the chance to be found not guilty.
And if they find him guilty again, will you still stand by him?
Absolutely. Ross is my life. We've had so many trials and tribulations this last year that if we hadn't have been so devoted to each other, it wouldn't have survived. But we're stronger than ever, so nothing can be put in our way now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The retrial opened on Wednesday the 20th of May 1992 in the Auckland High Court. By then, Darcy Tahira's widow, Suzanne Young, had seen 7 years pass since she lost her husband.
Because at the time I was 8 months pregnant, the second trial.
As we heard earlier, she was now in a new relationship, had a new life and new family. Heading into the retrial, the Crown had actually weighed up, calling Suzanne as a witness.
They wanted me to take the stand, and I thought that was bizarre, but they never said really why they wanted me on the stand. Whether it was to
humanise them?
Yeah, perhaps, I don't know. But then they decided no, because the condition I was in, that they said no, we'll forego what you going up on the stand, blah, blah, blah.
Would you have wanted to?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Sitting in court at the Crown table, lead prosecutor Bruce Squire QC was assisted by Chris Morris. Now just a quick note here, I of course wanted to get the prosecution's perspective on the retrial and to respond to some of the claims Ross and his lawyers later made. Unfortunately, Bruce Squire died in 2019. We contacted Chris Morris, but he said due to the passage of time, he has no recollection of the case, hasn't kept his file for it, and therefore couldn't comment. Finally, we went to Crown Law, who oversees all prosecutions in New Zealand. They told us because Ross's appeal is back before the courts, they could not respond to our questions. In 1992, seated across from the prosecutors that opening morning of the retrial were Peter Williams QC and Bob Hesketh, appearing for Ross. A jury of 6 women and 6 men would hear 7 days of evidence from 19 witnesses, presided over by Justice Ted Thomas.
I remember being at the trial. It was sobering.
Journalist Robert Mannion was also there to cover the proceedings. The next chapter in the case he'd investigated and reported on for years was about to play out in front of him.
It made it all more human for me. It made me think, this is a real man who got killed here, and he had family and everything. So I can remember being in the courtroom, sitting in the press box, and I think an overall feeling that when you took aside the legal stuff we'd been looking at, the horror of the crime carried some weight.
The Crown now had 3 main witnesses, Ernie, Gordon, and the recent arrival from Australia, Martin. Now, unfortunately, like the first trial, the retrial wasn't audio recorded. So again, we've had actors voice the key parts of the court transcript with some editing for time and clarity. Martin was the first key witness to testify.
Yes, I was working in the kitchen.
Prosecutor Bruce Squire led Martin diligently through the account he'd given to the Sydney cops. How, on the morning of the murder, he collected his porridge and sat down in the lunchroom where he was joined by Darcy. Then, all of a sudden,
Ross Appelgren approached him from behind and struck him over the head with the paddle. Tahira sort of slumped firstly to the left and then onto the floor.
Did the incident in which Mr. Tahira was hit on the head come as a surprise to you?
No, I knew he was going to be assaulted.
How did you know that he was going to be assaulted?
I was told.
By whom?
Ross Appelgren.
And why hadn't Martin mentioned all this to detectives when first interviewed back in January 1985?
I was serving my sentence and I just didn't want to be called a narc and take the consequences of that at the time.
I remember how stunned we were that he had turned.
Julie watched Martin testify, the man that went from defence to Crown witness. Even all these years later, she narrows her eyes with annoyance at the mere mention of his name.
Yeah, absolutely stunned. Didn't see that coming.
And so Ross...
And it was for his own benefit, definitely for his own benefit.
Right. How plausible did it seem to you, his about turn?
Well, just thought he's a liar. He's a liar.
It's easy to imagine Ross's lawyer Peter Williams was chomping at the bit to begin his cross-examination of Martin. Williams set about exposing Martin's conflicting accounts. First, there was his interview with police on the 7th of January, the day after Darcy's attack.
Would it be fair to say that when you were first interviewed by the police in relation to this incident, you told a series of lies?
That's true, yes.
Then there was Martin's evidence for the defence at the original trial, where he said the first time he saw Darcy on the Sunday morning was when he saw him lying on the floor.
Was that the truth?
No, it wasn't.
Was that deliberate lying on your part?
Yes, it was.
Were you under oath, just as you are today, so you were deliberately committing perjury? Is that right?
Yes.
Williams then pivoted to Martin's trip to Australia and his arrest for drug possession.
Have you told Sydney Police what you told the jury today, that you purchased heroin from a man in the street in King's Cross?
Yes.
Did you ever get charged with an offence relating to the heroin?
No.
So you initially were charged with importing cannabis into Australia, weren't you?
Yes, I was.
That was later withdrawn in the courtroom.
That's true, yes.
That was after you told police that you would be helpful to them in the Appelgren case in Auckland.
That's true, yes.
But it's your explanation for saying you would give this evidence that you would suddenly decide to go straight, and it was nothing to do with the fact that you were in custody and had these charges pending.
That's true.
It's just coincidental that your conscience spoke to you at a time when you were being interviewed by Australian police in relation to narcotics charges?
Yes. They knew about the smokes I had and about the warrants that were in New Zealand.
And did you say that if you were placed in custody, you would say that what you had said in Sydney would be a fabrication and that you would go back to your original story?
That's true, yes.
Would you have done that if you'd been placed in custody, or is that just another lie on your part?
No, I would have still been standing here giving evidence like I am.
You have conceded that you told the NZ police that if you were placed in custody, you would say you had fabricated what you told the Australian police about being a witness in the Te Hera homicide. Is that right?
Admitted that, yes. Simply, I didn't want to be locked up.
So would it be a fair observation to say you would be prepared to swing either way, depending on where your own personal interests lay?
Originally that thought was in my head, yes.
Finally, Williams took apart Martin's claim that he saw Ross murder Darcy.
You realise that at the last trial, a man called Ernie said that he had witnessed the homicide, don't you?
From what I've been told, yeah.
You see, Ernie, at the first trial, made no mention of you being present, did he, during the homicide?
I don't know.
It's very peculiar that Ernie wouldn't have seen you, isn't it?
Depends on where he was standing, I suppose.
Can you give any explanation why? If he gave evidence at the last trial that he didn't see you were sitting there in the chair for everyone to see.
I can't answer that.
You weren't under the chair? Or under the table? Or anything?
No.
Ernie wasn't the only Crown witness to cast doubt on Martin's evidence. Jim Stedman, the prison guard on duty in the kitchen, also testified he'd not seen Martin in or near the lunchroom when Darcy entered it with his porridge. In fact, Stedman said he couldn't even really remember who Martin was. By this point, the jury may have thought Martin's story had more holes than a piece of Swiss cheese. The Crown's next witness was Gordon. After the last trial, he'd been released early, in May 1987, from the sentence he'd been serving when Darcy was murdered. But as Gordon told prosecutor Bruce Squire, he hadn't stayed out of trouble. In just the last year, he'd spent
6 months in remand prison in Australia, and that's it, and 5 days in Mount Eden prison.
Gordon's evidence was broadly consistent with his first trial testimony. He recalled for the jury how a few days before the murder, Ross told him he planned to deal to Darcy, and then afterwards described the attack.
He said, I smashed him over the head, and I asked him how bad he was, and he said one side of his head is buggered, and I asked him why were people thinking heart attack or epileptic fit, and he said because there was no blood. He said if he dies, it will be a perfect murder because of the lack of blood.
Then, for the first time, a jury heard that Gordon hadn't told police what he knew in his very first interview.
I refused to speak to them.
It was at this point Gordon revealed how a few days after the murder, he'd been banged up in Mount Eden's segregation wing for 5 days.
I asked the police what protection I would be given. I still had 3 years to serve on my sentence, and they said that the police and the prison service would give me protection if I spoke.
So this was the important background to how Gordon came to implicate Ross. When it came time for Williams to question Gordon, that is what he zeroed in on, getting Gordon to describe what solitary confinement looks like.
You are virtually in solitary confinement for 4 or 5 days before you made that statement.
Locked up 23 hours a day, an hour's exercise gives you time to use the toilet and have a shower, and the rest of the time you're locked up.
So mentally, you would be at a fairly low ebb.
I was upset. I felt I was being punished for no reason at all. Yeah, I was upset about everything, you know. It is not a great life in solitary.
When you made the statement incriminating Mr. Appelgren, did the police come to you or did you ask to see them?
I asked to see them.
And did you make any conditions to them that were necessary before you would incriminate Appelgren?
I wanted one thing clear before I made a statement, was that I would be given to the best of their ability and the Justice Department's ability protection, and that was my only condition.
An Ombudsman's investigation in 1985 concluded that even a basic quality of life and measure of human dignity were not possible in Mount Eden's segregation wing. To get a better sense of how it was, I asked former prison guard Mark Anthony.
The isolation, some people just cannot handle isolation. The isolation certainly is a punishment.
In this particular instance, he was placed in segregation for around 5 days. Would that be normal?
No, not that I'm aware of. I don't think that would be a normal thing to have happen to somebody, no.
If that had happened, what type of psychological impact would that duration have on an inmate?
Well, this would only be my opinion, but I've seen them that have gone into segregation, and some have, at risk to themselves, have asked to come out of segregation purely for the fact that they believed that it was driving them doolally, really having a bad effect. Some people just cannot handle isolation.
Mark wasn't involved with Gordon's placement in segregation, but I asked his view on Peter Williams' suggestion that Gordon was segregated to psychologically break him down.
In my experience, it's entirely conceivable, yes.
Were you aware of that happening in other instances?
Yes. I was there during the morning that Darcy Tahira passed away and the days afterwards, and that turned basically the place upside down, and there were things going on there that just defied logic, sort of thing. It would seem, in my view, that the prison authorities and the police were just doing their best to have it work out so that the least amount of stress came to them, sort of thing, and got it over with quickly, sort of thing. I'm sure they would use methods to make it all go away.
And do you mean that in terms of the embarrassment the incident might have caused to the prison and the Justice Department?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
This is all just Mark's opinion. But again, the reason Gordon was segregated isn't clear. Gordon told the court he didn't know why. The Crown didn't explain it, and none of the prison documentation about it has surfaced. That means any theory that Gordon was segregated solely to make him talk to detectives remains just that, a theory. During Williams' cross-examination of Gordon, he raised further evidence not mentioned at the first trial. That was the important allegation Ernie made that Gordon aided the attack on Darcy by standing in the doorway of Jim Steadman's office to block his view of the lunchroom. A claim Gordon firmly denied.
I certainly wasn't in the kitchen before the homicide.
You see, he is saying you are a party to conspiracy to murder or conspiracy to injure. Why do you think Ernie would say you were standing at the door of Steadman's office if, in fact, you weren't there?
I would say he has just made a mistake for some reason. For what reason, I don't know.
Did you ever know about that allegation that he was making, that you were at the door of Steadman's office?
No, I never.
First time today you heard about that?
Yes.
Police ever told you it was alleged you were standing at the warder's office, blocking the view at the time of the homicide?
No, I have never heard that before.
Support for Gordon's denial came from Jim Steadman, who told police he didn't recall Gordon being at his office door, let alone blocking his view. When I read this part of the court transcript, I struggled to believe the police hadn't investigated Ernie's claims. I mean, if you're going to rely on his evidence about having seen a murder, don't you then verify the other things he said were going on? Well, at trial, the Crown didn't produce any evidence to show that this fact-checking of all Ernie's allegations had occurred. And the non-investigation of Gordon is one of the main things that bugs me about this case. It also bothers Darcy's wife, Suzanne. We've discussed it, and she says she always believed Ross didn't act alone. I suppose the question is, if you think there's evidence that other people were involved or assisted or Ross to commit the murder, do you think they should be charged?
Well, yes. They shouldn't be.
Yeah.
There would have had to be more than one.
The end of Gordon's evidence wrapped up the first week of the retrial. Still to come was Ernie, far and away the most important person in the prosecution's case. But this time around, Ross's lawyers could argue Ernie had 30,000 reasons to lie. Payment, they would say, showed Ernie's evidence was bought and paid for by police. They just had to hope the jury would buy that argument as well.
I just wanted to clarify that because since then there has been developments.
That they'd be swayed and come to a different conclusion the second time around.
It was a verdict that stunned his family and friends, many of whom wept openly and huddled together for support outside the court of Appelgren's fiancée.
That's coming up in the next episode of Nark. Thanks for listening to Nark, hosted and written by me, Mike Wesley-Smith. I'm also extremely grateful to everyone who spoke with me for this podcast, especially Suzanne Young and Julia Appelgren. And if anyone listening has more information about this case, I'd be keen to hear from you. Send an email to nark@rnz.co.nz. Follow and listen to Nark wherever you get your podcasts, and if you've enjoyed it, use the share button to recommend it to a friend. Some more quick thank yous to Ngā Taonga and Mediaworks for some of the archival audio, and to the voice actors who helped bring some of the characters in this episode to life. Nigel Collins, Ben Pearce, Peter McElwain, Craig Genty, Bonnie Harrison, Will Plummer, Jose Barbosa, Alex Gregg, Andrew Holden, William Ray, Phil Vine, and Jack Sargent. The RNZ producers who worked on this episode were Liz Garton, William Ray, Duncan Smith, and Justin Gregory. The audio engineer was William Saunders. Thanks also to Steve Burridge and Jeremy Ansell for the studio wrangling, and to Kevin Golding for opening the doors to me every week after hours. Graphics were designed by Amrita Marks, and the shorthand page, where you can find more information on this story, was made by Hing-Yi Kong. Check it out at rnz.co.nz/nark. Tim Watkin is RNZ's Executive Editor Audio, and Brianna Uritich-Gregg is the Production Coordinator. You can find more of RNZ's great podcasts like Witty Underwater on the RNZ website, rnz.co.nz/podcasts. Check them out. Bye for now.